12 years across borders. A memoir by Ch.1, Chapter 1. The Call. Before we begin, one note. What follows is a record of 12 years of work as a cross-border medical coordinator. It is a more not medical advice and not a treatment recommendation. If you or someone in your family is facing a similar situation, please speak with your own physician. Alright, let's begin. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon in July 2014. I was in a lab on the Oreo campus of Waseda's Graduate School of Information, Production and Systems in the industrial northern tip of Kyushu. I had a ballpoint pen in my hand and an English paper on the desk in front of me, and I was looking at neither. My master's thesis had not moved in a week. Outside the window, the Kyushu summer was doing its annual impression of a wet towel. My phone rang. I did not recognize the number. The country code was Taiwan. The man on the line introduced himself in Mandarin as Ch.1. He said his father had been diagnosed with cancer in Taipei. The doctors there had told the family there was nothing more to do. Someone had found through Google a cancer vaccine trial at Kurume University in southern Kyushu, about 90 minutes from where I was sitting. The family wanted to fly over and try it. They needed an interpreter who could handle a medical appointment in Japanese. A mutual acquaintance had given him my number. "Sir," I said. "Come." Then I added the disclaimer. "I should tell you, I've never done medical interpretation. I'm a materials engineering student. If you think that's all right, come. If not, no hard feelings." He was quiet for a beat. "It's fine," he said. "We just need someone willing." That was it. A phone call. A yes. An appointment booked for the following week. There was nothing dramatic about it. No sense of vocation, no feeling that a door had opened. A family needed an interpreter. I said yes, we moved on. If you had told me that afternoon that the call would still be running 12 years later, that I would sit in a Fukuoka office in 2026 writing about it in English, I would have laughed. I was 31. I was trying to finish a thesis about epoxy resin. I was broke. I needed the money. That was the whole of it. The uncomfortable fact in the background of that phone call was my age. I had come to Japan in 2010 at 27 after 4 years at Kurume University in Taichung and a stint at a Japanese language school. I started my master's in materials engineering in my late 20s. My Japanese classmates were 22 and 23. The gap was not just numerical. In the unspoken logic of Japanese corporate hiring, fresh graduates are 22. Foreign students are a risk. A 31-year-old foreign student trying to enter the Japanese new graduate pipeline is, statistically, a non-starter. I understood the logic. Understanding it did not make the rejections easier. I had been on the Japanese job hunting circuit, shokatsu, since the second semester of my first year of graduate school. Information sessions in Fukuoka, in Osaka, in Tokyo. Sweet Thai, RA Sumbinder, overnight bus to save money, capsule hotel, morning shave in a station bathroom. Companies would put me through 3 rounds, 4 rounds, sometimes all the way to a final interview with a board member. And then I would receive the standard Japanese rejection email. "We have concluded that regrettably, we were not fated to move forward together." That line is called Go Inga Nakata, meaning there was no destined connection. It is the most courteous way to tell a man he has wasted 2 months. Getting cut in the first round stings. Getting cut in the final round, after you have mentally picked your desk, is a different kind of tired. By the summer of 2014, I had finally received an internal offer, a NATE, from a semiconductor packaging inspection company in Tiita Prefecture, on the other side of Kyushu. The work matched my background. The location was reasonable. The company was stable. It was by every rational measure a good outcome. I was also the president of the Taiwanese Student Association at my university, which was how Ch.1 had been passed my number to begin with. Between the job hunt, the thesis, and the association, I was busy, which was useful, because being busy kept me from sitting still long enough to admit what I had already half decided about the Taita offer. I did not want to go. I could not have told you why, not in a clean sentence. The closest I came was a feeling that the job would deliver in exchange for the next 40 years of my life. A version of me that I could already picture and did not find interesting, competent, salaried, unremarkable. In Japan, indistinguishable from 200,000 other engineers at 200,000 other desks. I did not have a better plan. I just had the feeling. The phone call from Ch.1 arrived in the middle of that indecision. I did not think of it as an opportunity. I thought of it as a short job that would pay for a few weeks of rent. There is one thing about the Japanese graduate school system that I did not understand the value of until much later. In my lab, I read my papers in English. I wrote my reports and presented my research in Japanese. I spoke to my family on the phone in Mandarin. All three languages were always on, and the switching was not the hard part. The hard part was that each language came with a different logic for how an argument is put together. English academic prose wants a thesis at the top and a conclusion, and at the bottom an evidence marching between them like soldiers. Japanese lab reports want context first, then hedged observation, then a modest final inference, the point buried at the end, if it is allowed to surface at all. Mandarin in my family wants the rhythm of conversation, the joke at the right moment, the question that lets the other person save face. Keeping the three active simultaneously for 4 years did something to the shape of my attention. I did not know it at the time. I thought I was just tired. A week after the phone call, on the drive down to Kurume, I would discover that medical interpretation, with a dying man, his terrified adult son, and a Japanese oncologist speaking informal register about a treatment I barely understood, required running all three brains at once. Inside a 10-second response window for 2 straight hours. The family's question landed in Mandarin. The doctor's answer arrived in Japanese. The background technical literature I had read the night before was in English. Everything had to cross between them without tearing. If the graduate program had not been grinding that muscle into me 3 nights a week for 3 years, I would not have been able to take the call. I did not know this on the Wednesday afternoon in the lab. I only know it now. Between the phone call and the appointment, I had a week. I had never heard of the Kurume University Cancer Vaccine Center. I had never heard the word peptide used about cancer. I had never heard of HLA typing, which I later learned was an immunological compatibility check. The same kind of tissue matching that governs organ transplants. Everything on the PDF his son had emailed me was a new vocabulary. I was a materials engineering student. My research was on epoxy resin, specifically on the effect of nano and micro scale fillers on the dielectric breakdown behavior of the cured polymer under high voltage. I spent my days mixing compounds, curing samples, running them through a high voltage test rig for anywhere from 12 to 120 hours, pulling them out, looking at the damaged surfaces under a digital microscope, and adjusting the recipe for the next batch. Cancer biology was not adjacent. It was another planet. I asked a friend from the life sciences department to send me introductory papers. I read them at night. In the small apartment in Oreo, I was renting for 12,000 a month, by about 335 at the 2014 exchange rate of roughly 105 to the dollar. I made a note on the inside cover of a notebook: peptide vaccine to teach the immune system to recognize a specific protein fragment on tumor cells and attack cells that display it. That was as far as I got. It was enough to follow a conversation, not enough to predict one. The night before the appointment, I sat at my desk and wrote out a glossary. 3 columns on a sheet of A4 paper, Japanese term, Mandarin equivalent. A short English gloss in the margin when I needed to anchor the concept. The list ran to about 40 entries: response rate, efficacy, tolerability, adjuvant, contraindication, adverse event, clinical trial, investigational drug, open label, double blind. I already understood what every one of those words meant in English. What I was doing was building a set of hinges, a way to move each concept between languages without losing the load it was carrying. The thing I was most afraid of was not blood. It was not the dying man himself. It was not the grieving family. It was mistranslating a single word. Is not cure rate. Control is not remission. Median survival is not 5-year survival. In a medical conversation, a one-word slip does not just confuse the listener. It can change the decision a family makes about whether to sell a house to pay for a treatment. That weight I did not yet fully grasp. What I had instead was an instinct to do not get it wrong. I folded the A4 sheet in half and put it in the top pocket of my backpack. The morning of the appointment was warm and clear. I got up early, took the train down to Fukuoka, and rented a car from a branch near Hakata Station. I could have driven my own car. I had one. It was a 20-year-old Kia 660C Honda Today, the smallest legal class of vehicle in Japan, a box the size of a sofa with wheels. It shook above 70 km/h and gave up entirely on hills. Putting a cancer patient into that car for a 90 mid-highway drive was not a serious option. I rented a grey Toyota, a small hybrid sedan, one of the most fuel-efficient passenger cars on the Japanese market in 2014. It cost about 8,000 for the days, roughly 76. I would, over the next 2 years, rent the same class of car from the same branch dozens of times. Eventually the counter staff stopped asking why. I had been driving in Japan for less than a year. My Japanese driver's license was still new, still crisp in the plastic sleeve. I had not yet learned to be relaxed on the expressway. I drove slowly. I pulled up to the hotel near Hakata where H and his family were staying parked, and went up. They were waiting in the lobby. There were 3 of them. H himself, thinner than I had pictured, with a grey complexion but clear eyes. His son, early 30s, the one who had called me, and a young woman, his son's girlfriend, quiet and watchful, who would marry into the family a few years later. We shook hands. I introduced myself. I loaded their small bags. We got in the car. H took the front passenger seat. The son and the girlfriend squeezed into the back. I eased the Aqua out of the hotel's underground garage and onto the elevated expressway heading south. 10 minutes onto the expressway, I realized the inside of the car had changed. There was a new upholstery smell when I picked it up. That smell was gone now. Underneath it, something heavier had settled, the thick, waxy weight of medicated ointment, a sharp edge of isopropyl alcohol cutting through it, and at the bottom of the blend, the faintest iron note. The smell of a wound that has been cleaned but has not closed. H had an open lesion on his torso that the family had been dressing each morning. The gauze was fresh. The ointment was fresh. The alcohol swab was fresh. And yet inside a sealed car on a warm summer morning, the three of them together carried a quiet, insistent weight that no amount of freshness could disguise. I cracked the window half an inch. In my lab, the materials I worked with had a specific family of smells: epoxy resin, acetone hardener, the dry ozone tank of a high voltage rig underload. Those were the smells of things being tested. They were inorganic. They were cold. What I was smelling in the car was different in kind. It was the smell of a living body not being tested, but failing slowly, organically, in a way that no instrument I had ever used would have been able to measure. In materials engineering, you can calculate when a beam will snap. You run the numbers, you know the yield stress is, you know the failure mode. You can predict within a decent margin the moment at which a given structure will give up under a given load. The man in the passenger seat was not that kind of structure. Nobody in that car, not his son, not the doctors waiting in Kurume, not H himself, could tell me when the next thing in his body was going to give. That uncertainty, more than the smell, was what made the air in the car feel heavy. In the car, H did most of the talking. He wanted to talk. This was not what I'd expected. I had expected a dying man to be silent or stoic or afraid. Instead, H was expansive. He told stories about his business. He had run a small trading company in Taipei for decades. He told me how he had met his wife. He told me about his son as a boy, about a time the son had been caught stealing mangoes from a neighbor's tree and had tried to blame the dog. I realized later that a man who has been told he is going to die soon is often looking for someone to speak to who is not yet grieving him. The family had been grieving him for weeks. I was a stranger who was willing to laugh at the mango story. That was useful to him. I kept my own life out of the car for the most part. At one point the son asked my age. 31, I said. Still a student, H turned his head, not quite smiling. Good. Study while you can. No hurry. I did not tell him that my classmates were already 3 years into corporate careers. I did not tell him that I had an offer in my pocket I was probably going to turn down. A man in the front seat of my rented car, on his way to a cancer vaccine trial 90 minutes away, did not need to hear about my career anxieties. That was a kind of translation too, what to say, what not to say, when to let silence do the work. The green outside the window was the thick green of Kyushu summer, close to black in the shade of the hills. We passed through short tunnels and the light inside the car flickered. Traffic was light. We made good time. The Kurume University Cancer Vaccine Center was housed inside the broader university hospital complex. The building itself was a plain concrete rectangle, 4 or 5 stories, the color of old paper. Nothing about the exterior suggested what was happening inside. I parked in the visitor lot, helped H out of the car, and walked the family through the front doors. The first thing I noticed was that the building did not smell like a hospital. Large Japanese hospitals have a specific smell, a chemical tang of floor disinfectant layered over something older, something like warmed linen. I had been in a few as a student, accompanying friends to various minor disasters. That smell was in my mind what a hospital was. The cancer vaccine center smelled like paper. The floors were linoleum, the walls were beige. The waiting area held maybe a dozen chairs and 4 patients reading quietly. Nobody was rushing. The light was flat and even. It felt like a small public library that happened to run blood tests. Kate, the trials coordinating nurse, came out from behind the reception counter. We had spoken on the phone half a dozen times over the preceding week, confirming paperwork and logistics. We had never met. She looked at me, smiled, and said, "Oh, so you're Mr. Lin. Thank you for all the calls." Though carried a small note of surprise in it. The kind you make when a voice on the phone finally gets a face attached. She nodded at me briefly, then turned her professional attention to H and the family and began walking them through the intake process. I stood by the wall and watched. Something small happened in that moment that I did not have a name for at the time. It was not pride. It was closer to the registration of a fact. People in this building already know who I am. A week ago I was nothing to them, and now, for a few minutes, I am someone they are glad to see. That was new. What I did not know, standing against that wall, was that the role I was stumbling into already had a name. In Japan they call it K-T-K-F coordinator. In Taiwan it is G.H. Gansh, the case manager. The work sits between medicine and logistics, between translation and advocacy. And it has its own quite professional lineage on both sides of the East China Sea. I had not read a single line of that literature. I did not know there were seniors to study under. I had simply said yes on a phone call and shown up in a rented car with a glossary folded in my pocket. The physician leading the Kurume program I will call Dr. IT in these pages, out of respect and out of caution about naming any individual physician in a memoir. He ran the Cancer Vaccine Center and had been publishing on peptide cancer vaccines for over a decade. He stood up when we came in, a tall, extremely thin man in his late 50s, gold-rimmed glasses, gray hair, sleeves rolled past his elbows. His forearms were corded with the kind of tendons you get from a lifetime of using your hands. The overall effect was of a man who might, outside the clinic, practice a quiet martial art. He bowed slightly, said Ch.1. Then he looked directly at me and switched into simple English. "I will speak slowly," he said. "Take the time you need to translate. There is no hurry." Something in my shoulders released. In the week leading up to the appointment, that the version of the doctor I had been dreading was a man who spoke fast, who did not stop for an interpreter, who assumed a command of medical Japanese I did not have. Dr. IT was the opposite of that man. He delivered one sentence, then stopped. He watched my face. He waited until I finished translating, then delivered the next sentence. Over the next 10 years, I would sit in consultations with dozens of Japanese oncologists. I would not meet another one who treated an interpreter the way he did that afternoon. A few other things about Dr. IT revealed themselves over the course of the consultation, and later over the course of our working relationship. He had survived cancer himself. He mentioned it without ceremony, the way another doctor might mention having done a residency in Osaka. A physician who treats cancer and has also been a cancer patient speaks with a specific gravity. Patients listen differently. He was an evangelist for brown rice. Whenever the clinical agenda allowed it, he would veer into diet. More brown rice, less white rice, fewer sweets, more vegetables. Most patients nodded politely and went home to eat whatever they liked. He did not seem to mind. He said it again the next time. He used prescribed Chinese herbal medicine alongside the investigational work. This would have been unremarkable to a Japanese patient. Kemp is an integrated part of the Japanese medical system and is partially covered by national insurance. But it struck me, a foreigner, as an unexpected combination for a researcher working on cutting-edge immunotherapy. He did not seem to experience the contradiction I was looking for. The frontier and the ancient sat on the same shelf for him. And because this was a clinical trial, there was paperwork, consent forms, authorization to use tissue samples, long-term follow-up agreements, adverse event reporting acknowledgements, a stack of them. He read them aloud, one clause at a time. If anything is unclear, ask. Do not sign if you do not understand. Inside of 10 minutes, I understood that I was in the room with a particular kind of doctor. Not a common kind. The consultation was scheduled for 20 minutes. It ran over 2 hours. .it walked the family through the biology of the investigational peptide vaccine, how it was designed to present a fragment of a tumor, associated protein to the immune system, how HLA typing would determine whether H immune makeup was compatible, whether the injections would be given the back of the neck, the underarm, the upper inner thigh near the groin, 4 separate injections at each visit, and the dosing schedule under the trial protocols, once weekly, 8 visits per course. He described possible adverse events in the blunt, ordered way Japanese physicians describe adverse events: injection site reaction, fever, fatigue. The rare and the common listed without adjectives. The family asked questions. I translated them forward. He answered. I translated them back. We moved like that for an hour and a half. Somewhere in the middle, Dr. IT arrived at the question that I had known from reading the trial documents the night before was coming. He said in Japanese one sentence about the response rate observed in the trial's preliminary work, the share of patients whose tumors had, in the trial's internal measurements, responded to the vaccine. I am not going to write the number down here. What he said that afternoon was the number as he understood it in a specific clinical trial in the summer of 2014 inside an investigational program that had not received marketing approval and was not proposing to be a cure. That number, written plainly on a page of an English language memoir in 2026, would tell a reader nothing true. It was never meant to travel outside the room. It was meant to calibrate the expectation of one family in 1 hour in one consultation. Putting it on a page for general readers would be a kind of theft, a fact ripped out of its context and handed to someone who cannot possibly use it correctly. What I can tell you is that the number was the kind of number that sits in the worst possible zone for a translator. It was not high enough to sound like a promise, and not low enough to sound like a refusal. It was the kind of number that, rendered carelessly in Mandarin, could tip the family in either direction toward a despair that walks out of the room, or toward a false hope that sells a house. I had a half-second to decide how to translate it. What I did was translate it flat. I spoke the number in Mandarin exactly as Dr. IT had spoken it in Japanese. I did not soften it. I did not pad it. I did not attach my own hedging. I added one sentence of additional context. IT says some patients respond and some do not, which was a direct rendering of his next clause, and stopped. The family looked at each other. Nobody spoke for a few seconds. Dr. IT let the silence sit. Then he added, quietly, for the patients who do respond, the effect can be meaningful. We will do what we can. I translated that forward. H nodded slowly. All right, he said. We'll do it. That was the decision. He said it the way a man signs a contract for a house he has already decided to buy. Years later, when I taught younger interpreters how to do this work, I used that moment as the first lesson. The doctor's sentence belongs to the doctor. Your job is to carry it across without leaving anything on either bank. The urge to soften is natural. Resist it. The family did not come to Kurume to hear you manage their emotions. They came to hear what the doctor said. I did not know, sitting in that chair in 2014, that I was laying down the ethics of a career. I was too focused on not getting the number wrong. The drive back to Fukuoka was quiet. On the way down, H had told stories. On the way back, he looked out the window. His son sat in the back with the girlfriend. Nobody was crying. Nobody asked me to re-explain anything the doctor had said. They were doing the arithmetic privately. The arithmetic was this: 8 weekly injections. Each round trip from Taipei to Fukuoka, hotel, meals, rental car. My fee, the cost of the injections themselves, ran into the hundreds of thousands of yen per injection. Somewhere on the order of 300,000 to all 400s out each, hence 14, 900 to 900 to 3,800 per treatment, multiplied by 8. That was roughly a down payment on a small apartment in Taipei. All of that with no guarantee of response. I kept my eyes on the road. At the hotel, I helped him unload. The son took my hand in both of his. Mr. Lin, he said, thank you. Really, next week, I said. I'll pick you up. I watched them walk into the lobby in the rearview mirror, 3 figures getting smaller. And then I pulled out and drove to Hakata to return the rental. Oreo is in Kita, Kyushu, which is an hour and a half north of Fukuoka on the local trains. My apartment was 1 room, about 10 square meters, with a sink and a half, fridge against 1 wall, a single bed against another, a small desk under the window, and a combined shower and toilet in a plastic unit the size of a wardrobe. Rent was 35 Zaoalzen. The building was 40 years old. The stair lights flickered. I got home just before sunset. I dropped my backpack, threw the car key on the desk, and went straight into the shower. I remember this because the shower was one of the few things in the apartment that worked well. Hot water, strong pressure. I stood on it for a long time and then let the day leave me. The glossary in my pocket. The smell, that was not a hospital smell. The number I had translated and not softened. All of it ran off and went down the drain. I got out, boiled water, made instant ramen at the desk, opened my laptop and checked for new email. There were none that mattered. Before I slept, I thought about the day. People have asked me since whether I was afraid that night. Whether I lay awake worrying about whether I had mistranslated, whether H would live. whether I was getting into something I could not handle. I was not. What I felt lying on the single bed in the small apartment in Orio was something quieter. A task had started and ended in the same day. There was a clean edge to it. I had done the thing. I was finished. Graduate students do not often get that feeling. Research does not end. Papers do not end. Thesis drafts do not end. This had ended. The day had a shape, that was all. I turned off the light and slept. The Kurume consultations kept coming after that first day. More families. More drives down the expressway. More versions of that same quiet arithmetic in the car on the way home. And one thing, quickly, became true. Not every patient who walked into the cancer vaccine center on their own feet was going to walk back out of it. Some of them I would drive to the airport in coffins. Some of them I would lose touch with and learn about months later through a sister's email. Some of them I will watch become witnesses, in the rarer cases, to the possibility that the vaccine had actually done something for them. And over the next 2 years, the cast of those patients would expand into a section of Taiwanese society I had never expected to meet. The descriptions of the Kurume University peptide vaccine trial in this chapter reflect the author's memory of a clinical trial consultation in 2014 and are included as memoir. Nothing in this chapter should be read as a claim of efficacy, a treatment recommendation, or medical advice. Cancer treatment decisions should be made with qualified physicians who know the patient's history and current clinical guidelines. That is the end of this chapter. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next one.